Disney may not want to admit it, but Star Wars is in a strange place right now. The only universally praised piece of live-action Star Wars since The Mandalorian was The Force Awakens, which in itself has become retroactively hated due to feeling like a retread of A New Hope. The Book of Boba Fett, which seemed to have had all the components to be a beloved series, had what was at best lukewarm reception, with much of the criticism for it being aimed towards how slowly paced the show was, and how seemingly out of character Boba Fett felt. It didn't help that the best parts of Book of Boba, episodes 5 and 6, didn't even follow Boba himself, but the Mandalorian. When the best parts of a series don't even include its title character on screen, you know something has gone horribly wrong. This was a really bad look for what was supposed to hold us over for what's soon to come. Obi-Wan Kenobi is an ongoing live-action Star Wars show with its third episode being released today. It follows Obi-Wan as he protects Luke Skywalker from potentially being discovered by the Empire. The fact that Kenobi was even greenlit shows a great change in Disney's sentiment towards the prequels. Not even 10 years ago, making anything even remotely related to the prequels was something Disney was just not willing to do. But for the past couple years, Disney has shown a newfound willingness to make content related to them. Still though, even diehard fans of the prequels have become increasingly skeptical of how Disney is promoting Kenobi. As seen from all of its promotional material, Disney seems to be touting Reva, a new, never-before-seen character, to be just as important as Obi-Wan and Anakin. While I'll wait until I've seen the entire show before I pass judgment, what I'm mostly concerned about, or for, is Moses Ingram, the woman who plays Reva. Disney does not have a good track record when it comes to their treatment of POC actors within Star Wars, and I think they're unknowingly setting her up for failure. If Kenobi is received poorly, I think it's going to do irreparable damage to the Star Wars brand, and if this is the case, Disney will undoubtedly deflect this criticism on what they believe to be the bigotry of the general Star Wars fan base. With all that being said, this is why I think that Obi-Wan Kenobi is Star Wars' last chance. I hope you all enjoy. For the past decade, there seemed to be a renaissance of sorts on the public perception of the Star Wars prequels. I think the recent, to be frank, failure of the Star Wars sequel trilogy has shed a new light on them. The generation that had seen those films as children have now grown up, and can now articulate and share for themselves how much those films meant to them. Since the release of the Clone Wars Season 7 in 2020, Disney has shown an influx of love for prequel-era content. Now more than ever, it's a good time to have grown up with the Star Wars prequels. But as you all know, it hasn't always been like this. Star Wars was sold from Lucasfilm to Disney back in the year 2012. And this is when I think the hate for the Star Wars prequels was perhaps at its highest since the original release of those films. When Disney acquired Star Wars from creator George Lucas for $4.05 billion, George Lucas had apparently already done extensive work outlining the sequel trilogy. Like the prequel trilogy before them, the sequels would have delved into even more depth about the Force. The next 3 Star Wars films were going to get into a microbitic world, but there's this world of creatures that operate differently than we do. I call them the Wills. They feed off the Force. We're vessels for them, and the conduit is the midichlorians. The midichlorians are the ones that communicate with the Wills. The Wills, in a general sense, they are the Force. Unfortunately though, all these ideas and the story treatments that George Lucas gave Disney and Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, were all abandoned when it came time to develop the sequel trilogy. George Lucas's strange, admittedly somewhat wacky ideas about the Force were most likely too out there for Disney. They were not about to risk any backlash of making anything that would even remotely resemble the prequels on a brand they had just spent $4.5 billion on. This is 100% the reason why Disney would then bring in and hire J.J. Abrams, who had previously worked to help reboot the Star Trek franchise, to helm the 7th Star Wars film. J.J. Abrams is a lot of things.
What are stories but mystery boxes?
And he was definitely the right person to try and do what Disney wanted to be accomplished, but I think he could be perceived as a kind of poster boy for the hatred aimed towards the Star Wars prequels at the time. Watch any interview with J.J. Abrams, and you can tell how he feels about the prequels. While admittedly, he has been quite diplomatic about his distaste for them, I can almost guarantee he agreed with Disney's decisions to ditch George Lucas's original story treatments. When Slash Film sat down with Abrams and asked him about the prequels, he had this to say: "All I'll say about the prequels is if you ask someone around the age I was when the original trilogy came out, what's your favorite Star Wars movie, they will tell you one of the original trilogy. If you ask someone around the age when the prequels came out, they will say one of the prequels." Abrams may beat around the bush when it comes to the prequels, but he most definitely doesn't when it comes to Jar Jar Binks. A lot of the prequel hate seems to stem with how quote-unquote kid-oriented they appear to be, with Jar Jar Binks being the most obvious case of the kidification of Star Wars. Abrams is most definitely in agreement with this sentiment, considering in an interview with Vanity Fair, he admitted to wanting to include Jar Jar Binks' bones somewhere in the desert in the background of The Force Awakens. Speaking of Jar Jar, love him or hate him, he was groundbreaking in the sense that no other film had been brave enough to make a completely CGI supporting character in a live-action film. Despite this being a breakthrough for the film industry, and George Lucas also being ahead of his time in terms of creating the first film to ever be shot 100% digitally, and the amount of green screen and blue screen used in the films, many fans felt that the prequels had an over-reliance on these techniques, and Abrams himself also seemed to agree with this, considering how often he went out of his way during the lead up to The Force Awakens to really emphasize how they would be using CGI in the upcoming film. The Force Awakens teaser was released on November 14th, 2014, and prominently featured John Boyega as Finn, a seemingly defecting stormtrooper, and Daisy Ridley as Rey, who appeared to be a scavenger of sorts living on a desert planet. These points were then corroborated again by the film's trailer, showing more of Finn's plight, along with showing him fighting Kylo Ren with a lightsaber, implying that he's Force sensitive. Rey as well is given more backstory, and it's explicitly stated that she is a nobody. The film would release later that year to universal critical acclaim, and Star Wars' public perception as a brand had seemingly recovered from that of the prequels. From those previously released trailers, I wouldn't blame you if you thought that Finn was going to be the protagonist of The Force Awakens. While this didn't end up being the case, Finn is still given tons of screen time, an interesting internal conflict, intrigue in the form of being Force sensitive, etc. Him and Rey are dual protagonists, and there's no reason to think that they wouldn't continue to be in the following films. 3 years later, Star Wars would change forever. In 2017, The Last Jedi released to arguably the largest backlash seen within the Star Wars fanbase since The Phantom Menace. I'm not going to go in depth on its story beats or its controversial portrayal of Luke Skywalker, but I am going to go into the film's treatment of its many secondary characters. Even if you enjoyed The Last Jedi, I think you can admit that it did Finn anything but justice. The Last Jedi chose the sideline Finn to focus much more on Rey and the dynamic between her and Kylo Ren. Considering the keys of the Star Wars franchise had been handed off to Rian Johnson at the time, giving him almost complete creative control to mess with everything Abrams had been setting up in Episode 7, this gave Johnson the power to retroactively make Finn a red herring. No longer was he the defecting stormtrooper that was set to become one with the Force, but he was now regulated to being almost purely comic relief, and being set aside on a mission that is almost completely irrelevant to the A-plot. In an interview with John Boyega, the actor that played Finn would say, "The Last Jedi was feeling a bit iffy for me. I didn't necessarily agree with a lot of the choices in that, and that's something that I spoke to Mark a lot about, and we had conversations about it." Like Mark Hamill, the actor that played Luke Skywalker, Boyega didn't have much faith in the direction Rian Johnson was sending his character. Rian Johnson seemed much more interested in subverting our expectations rather than having POC characters in the A-plot. John Boyega actually went in depth on something similar to this during an interview with GQ magazine, where he famously said that, "I'm the only cast member whose experience of Star Wars was based on their race." And considering how disrespected his character was throughout The Last Jedi, he is well within his right to feel this way. He would go on to talk about how poorly he had been treated by Disney, saying, "You do not bring out a black character, market them to be more important than they actually are, and then push them to the side. It's straight up false advertisement, unfair to the actor in question, and is all but another example of black and POC characters being cast aside in most Hollywood blockbusters. You guys knew what to do with Daisy Ridley, you knew what to do with Adam Driver, but when it came to Kelly Marie Tran, when it came to John Boyega, you knew fuck all. They gave all the nuance to Adam Driver, all the nuance to Daisy Ridley." Prior to John Boyega coming out and making these statements, and also speaking on behalf of Kelly Marie Tran, a lot of the times whenever someone levied criticism against the Star Wars sequel trilogy, they were labeled as a racist or a bigot. And while racist and bigoted Star Wars fans of course exist, as they do in all fan bases, I feel as though that this deflection of sorts of criticism towards the Star Wars sequel trilogy is a lot less applicable when one of the main actors of the trilogy, a black man, for himself has spoken about how dissatisfied he was with The Last Jedi, and how poorly he was treated as an actor. John Boyega holds many of the sentiments fans of Star Wars hold against Disney, of them not knowing or trying to do anything interesting with the new Star Wars characters but Rey and Kylo, two white characters in an already primarily white franchise. This is why I'm very worried about Reva's inclusion in Obi-Wan Kenobi. While it is delightful to see a black actress in a prominent role of a big budget, fantasy-based property, I fear that Moses Ingram will eventually be treated as poorly by Disney as they did to John Boyega. Not to mention that if any aspects of Obi-Wan Kenobi don't stick, Moses Ingram and the character Reva will undoubtedly be forced to feel the wrath of Kenobi's naysayers. Moses Ingram is being put between a rock and a hard place. If people don't like Kenobi for legitimate reasons, such as for its potentially lackluster writing, and not for bigoted reasons such as not wanting diversity within Star Wars, Disney can brush off all incoming criticism as coming only from racist and bigoted fans. Disney is smart in this way. They think they can do no wrong. But putting Moses Ingram in this position is wrong, considering they won't have to pay the price for Kenobi's detractors, Moses Ingram will, with the inevitable racist remarks that will be thrown at her from racist segments of the fanbase. For this reason, if you don't enjoy Kenobi, think it does a disservice to your favorite legacy characters, or do not enjoy the ending, please do not take your qualms out with the actors themselves. They're simply actors doing a job, and have very little to no creative control over the script or the dialogue they're being paid to deliver. If this is the case, please direct your criticism to Disney and the writers of Kenobi, and not the individual actors themselves. This shouldn't even have to be said, but this stance has simply been done too many times, with people associated with Star Wars starting to loathe the brand.
Cheeky question, but does that reduce the chances of a return for Poe Dameron one day?
Probably, but you know, who knows? I need another house or something.
On May 17th, only 2 weeks ago, an article was released by Vanity Fair on the current state of the Star Wars franchise. On its cover were Obi-Wan, Ahsoka Tano, Din Djarin, and Cassian Andor, all stars of upcoming Disney Plus Star Wars series. This article goes into great detail about all the upcoming shows, all the long-standing journeys these actors have and will have with Star Wars, and most interestingly perhaps, an interview with Kathleen Kennedy about the current state of the Star Wars franchise. "We have a roadmap," she says. After The Rise of Skywalker released in 2019, Lucasfilm and Disney felt as though they needed to take time to step back and create a roadmap for this new era of Star Wars content. George was always dealing with episodes. Ironically, he was serializing his storytelling, which is why I think it's just organic that we made the transition into television. After completing everything they seemingly wanted to accomplish with the sequel trilogy, Kathleen feels as though Star Wars no longer needs to be confined to having to release films and trilogies, and they should be aiming to create larger scale, more serialized stories through Disney Plus, and one-off films that are part of a larger narrative, similar to what Kevin Feige has accomplished with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Lucasfilm is no doubt trying to replicate the MCU's success, which I think is the correct step in order to elevate Star Wars past its growing pains of being revived after being purchased from George Lucas. And the key to doing so, I think, is moving away from the confines of the Skywalker storyline. It's our job to step away now, but still have a connection that George created. That won't stop, but we are moving on from the Skywalker saga. This is one of the very few times that I wholeheartedly agree with Kathleen Kennedy. In order for Star Wars to expand, the brand needs to move away from the Skywalker family, and perhaps sometime in the future, away from the time period between the Phantom Menace to the Rise of Skywalker. I know this transition is going to feel rough at first, as George Lucas has always emphasized Star Wars being about family.
JJ, what happened to Darth Vader's grandchildren?
But I think for Star Wars to be able to make stories far removed from the Skywalkers, this is going to be a necessary evil. Doing so will usher in a new era of Star Wars films and television shows that will create a new segment of fans for generations to come. In order for Disney to replicate the MCU's success all over again, Disney needs to find dedicated, passionate filmmakers who will be in it for the long run, not just coming and going as they please. They need to hire those that are willing to respect the source material and are willing to go back and watch at least some of the auxiliary material that is relevant to what they are creating. This will allow these new works to have as much cohesion as possible, and considering some of Kathleen's quotes in the Vanity Fair article, it seems as though they've already come to this realization. Anyone who comes into the Star Wars universe needs to know that it's a 3, 4, 5-year commitment. If Disney and Lucasfilm can actually put these measures into place, all the while making heartfelt stories that have respect for what George Lucas created, I think this new era of Star Wars could one day match or even surpass the Marvel Cinematic Universe. A lot is at stake with Obi-Wan Kenobi. While the look of certain characters did appear to be a bit questionable, and some of the actors' statements even more so, the recent Vanity Fair article helped calm my nerves a bit, as Kenobi will be the first of many shows to usher in a new era of Star Wars. For the first time in a long time, those with power within Disney and Lucasfilm seem to have the best interests of the franchise in mind. Perhaps in the near future, even sentiments about the sequel trilogy will change when Disney announces and releases inevitable spin-offs following Rey or even Kylo. Unfortunately though, I don't think John Boyega would be willing to return after how poorly he was treated during the sequel trilogy. I really hope Moses Ingram doesn't have to go through the same thing he did. Remember, if you don't like anything about Kenobi, please direct your frustrations to Disney and Lucasfilm, and not the individual actors themselves. And I can't wait to watch the third episode myself, as it should have been released the day this video was uploaded. This has been Nolo as fuck, till next time.